What's going on, everybody? Oscar back. So, today I want to talk to you all about a series that I've read recently. So, this series is actually kind of old. I think it came out something like 5 years ago, and I've already been given a hard time about talking about things that are old. So, while the story is old, it's essentially new to me because I read all of it actually. I read the whole damn series. Just because you read it doesn't mean that everybody else has read it. And, there's other people out there that aren't in the same circles. And sometimes they need to be, told about a series or, have a series, be put before them before they, decide to check it out. And I like to be able to be a part of that about, putting series in front of people and saying, like, hey, you should check this out. And not always do people check out the series that I recommend them because it's not, not everything is for everyone. And I'm a channel where I talk about a lot of different stuff. And this is a series that I wanted to initially, in the beginning, recommend this series when I first started reading it. And once I finished the final volume of it, I'm not so sure that this is a series that I want to go out of my way to actually start recommending people. And like I said, this has been out for a while, and this is kind of a spoiler. It's part one of a bigger narrative, and who the hell knows if part two is ever going to come out. There may never be a part two of the series. So this was initially going to be like, you should read this because I thought that it was going to be over. I thought it was going to end in 8 volumes, and it did not end in 8 volumes. Instead, we're going to do something a little bit different than what I typically do. Instead, this is going to be a should you read. So let's do this. I'm going to show you a bunch of panels from this manga, and it's going to be set up almost like my why you should read. But as I show you panels, I'm going to kind of give my thoughts about it, and it's pretty much like going into the Song of Ice and Fire books. Who knows if those are ever going to be completed, or even the King Killer Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. Who the hell knows if they're ever going to be completed, but it's worth checking out. So let's do this. This is Should You Read? Should You Read Seventh Garden? Seventh Garden is a manga series written by Mitsu Izumi, who had also done the manga version of Anohana, The Flowers We Saw That Day. Her current work is a series titled Magus of the Library, which as of this writing is 5 volumes deep in English, and even further along in the original Japanese. Seventh Garden is definitely a unique story and totally hooked me from the get-go, though as it gets going, it does start to get a little convoluted. However, we'll cover that part in a little bit. When I initially set out to do this video, I was going to record a Let's Talk About, but at the time I was already swamped with videos and instead decided to put it off until I'd read the whole series. Several times throughout, I sat in awe of Izumi Mitsu's incredible ability to not only write characters and write them well, but also her ability to bring these gorgeous drawings to life. Some of it definitely looks like CGI, which isn't a huge deal. A lot of artists nowadays use it, and the one I am most familiar with using it is Hiroya Oku, who wrote one of my favorite series ever, Gantz. I'm a huge fan of the world building here, as I am someone who adores fantasy. Though as you read on, you learn the story is not purely fantasy. There is much more going on in the pages of Izumi Mitsu's world, a world beyond the world. And another one beyond that. I won't get into specifics as to not spoil too much of this story, despite it already being more than 5 years old. It would be difficult to do so regardless because of the various machinations, and this is where it gets convoluted. There exist angels in this world, as well as devils, and the people of said world either hearken to the angels or are whispered to sweetly by the devils. That's not the convoluted part. We have a character that exists in 3 separate states of being and jumps between them so much it becomes extremely confusing. It's like a split personality. First she's sour, then she's sweet, then she's a devil, then she's scorned. But somewhere inside she wants to find peace. However, the devil on her shoulder has her by a death grip and refuses to let go. The story begins with a gardener, and this gardener, Aowen, finds a sleeping girl covered in vines left behind for a millennia. Upon her awakening from her restful slumber begins a tale of brutal revenge. This is one of those stories where a character can transform into a weapon, like Soul Eater, Noragami, and stories in that vein. Even a more recent one, Dororon, features a similar aesthetic. I adored the interspersed dynamics of a quiet, rustic life that is then trampled by a brewing war. These characters, or gnomes as the angels refer to them, are pawns in a bigger game than they could ever imagine. Nations war with one another, regimes are toppled, new ones erected, countless innocent lives are lost in the skirmishes of the power-hungry, yet time presses on, ignorant, unaware, and uncaring of what happens in the world it ubiquitously unfolds. The charge is carried by the children and grandchildren of those who came before. Vendettas are forged in the blood of those who died needlessly for a cause that gives little to no care about their lives. The rich and wealthy create the drama, and then it is up to the poor to give their youth their vitality in the conflict. Hate only breeds more hate. Eye for an eye doesn't cure a thing, but rather leaves the whole world blind. Meanwhile, the angels governing this world, they watch the clashes of the gnomes and they laugh. They do so because the wars and death, the civilizations that rise and fall mean nothing to the angels. The angels have their own plans set into motion that will wipe out this world's existing gnomes and usher in a new world. I won't go further into the background and into the layer above the fantasy. I'll leave that for you to uncover yourself should you take this trip with these characters into this world. Despite this being an older story, I haven't ever seen anyone I follow do a video on it, and I think it deserves one. It deserves to be read. Even if the author has moved on, the story still beats like a heart. Its pulse slow, but not dead. Maybe one day Izumi Mitsu will decide to return to it, dust off the old stationery, and pick up where we left off. If there is enough of a desire for it, who is to say the day won't come when we are reunited with Owen and the devil on his shoulder? In the end, I do recommend reading Seventh Garden. However, you do so knowing it may never have a clear conclusion. Still, I believe it's the journey, not the destination, that matters. These are people worth getting to know and spending time with. They love, they suffer, they grow and feel pain. On the one hand, this mangaka spent years of her life creating and perfecting this world. On the other hand, it's incomplete, and who knows if it ever will be. I'll leave you all to decide if you want to take the leap, but I definitely think it's worth it, even if it never has a clear conclusion. So it was difficult for me to figure out how I was going to do this video, because first I was gonna do a why you should read. That's what I had in mind. I was reading it. I was reading it on the Viz app, and I read the whole damn thing on the Viz app, and I collected all of the manga, so I have all 8 volumes of the manga. I loved this story, but at the same time, it doesn't have an ending. It cliffhangers, and who knows if the author is ever, going to finish it. She may never finish it. She may never finish the story. She's writing Magus of the Library. And so, this is what she's in the middle of right now. I don't know I think she's still writing it. I think she started writing it, right after she finished Seventh Garden. And I don't want to, spoil Seventh Garden, because I do want you to read it for yourself and check it out and everything, because I do think it's a great story, and I love her artwork. I think she's an incredibly talented artist, but it kind of bugs me that 5 years have gone by, and who the hell knows if it's ever going to be finished. But I can understand, as a creative person and as someone who's written books and published books, I can see that. I can see her being burned out and wanting to move on to something else, do something else. Is she ever going to come back to it? Is she ever going to come back to Seventh Garden and finish it and do a whole nother run? Because to me, it's I'm not really sure where it's at, that there's really space for her to do more. I feel like she should have just ended it. Maybe she was ambitious, and she's oh, you know what, maybe later on I can come back and add more to it. But it was perfect. The way she set it up was perfect for it to just end it right there. You get your conclusion, 8 volumes. And I'm not trying to tell anybody else, how to write their stories. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to just bring up a conversation about it and give praise for something that I thought was a good story, and a really solid mangaka who is an incredible artist who can draw extremely well. I have no idea how many hours a day she spent working on Seventh Garden, but I imagine it was countless. I imagine she spent countless hours just drawing these fine details and like the inner workings and the background of the characters and everything. There's so much lore, so much detail, and I can see that she burned out or something, while writing it because of how intricate it is. Like George R.R. Martin burned out while writing his books, and Patrick Rothfuss. I don't want to say that Patrick Rothfuss burned out, but I mean the fact that it's been like over 11 years and neither of those two dudes has dropped their third, or like Patrick Rothfuss hasn't dropped his third book, Doors of Stone. I mean, and George R.R. Martin hasn't dropped Winds of Winter, and I've read all of those books. I haven't read Dance of Dragons by George R.R. Martin, which is like his version of, which is like, I guess Dance of Dragons is like his what's that book called? Which is like George R.R. Martin's Silmarillion or whatever. Silmarillion. Which is George R.R. Martin's Silmarillion. I've tried to say that name like 30 times in a row. So like I look at it like as being like his version of Tolkien's Silmarillion. I read all of the A Song of Ice and Fire books. I read the first two Kingkiller Chronicles books by Patrick Rothfuss. I haven't read the Something of Regards, or Something of Slow Regard, which is the book about the creepy girl on the rooftops. I haven't read that, but I'm like so ready for more fantasy. Like I love fantasy stories, and that's why I think I loved Seventh Garden so much, because there's like really fantastical elements in this story. And this kid pretty much finding this girl in the garden, pretty much finding her in the garden, and it's just like, I love fantasy. I'm a huge fan of fantasy, and I love these stories. I've read the first two Lord of the Rings books. I haven't finished the third one, but I also read The Hobbit. So I read The Hobbit, the first two, the Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers. I have not yet finished Return of the King, though. I'm like halfway through Return of the King, and for whatever reason, I just never finished it. And like I'm such a sucker for fantasy stories. Like anytime there's like a fantasy story, like I want to read it. There's another one that I read that I can't remember the name of. I'll put it right here. I forgot what it's called, but it's by these two authors. One of them has like a series that's like about lizards or whatever. I've also read Brandon Sanderson's two of Brandon Sanderson's books. I've read The Way of Kings, I think it's what it's called, and I started reading the second one in that series that I cannot remember the name of, Radiance of Words. I read like 200 pages of Radiance of Words, and I think that's kind of like where I burned out on reading, because this is like about the time where like I kind of burned out on reading books, and I started reading manga like way more heavily, and I haven't read a book in a really long time, which is kind of tragic, because I used to read a lot of books. I've read a lot of books. I have like a ton of books on my bookshelf, which maybe one day, if you guys want to see it, I'll show you my bookshelf, which is separate from like my manga shelves, obviously. Yeah, I mean, this is a lifelong thing for me. I've always been into reading. I've always liked, physical media. I have a lot of vinyl as well. I'm like really all over the place. This channel is called The Galactic Collector for a reason, because I am a nutcase and I seem to love spending money on things I don't need. So yeah, that's me. That's everything I have for you. I don't want to make this video really long, because I feel like if it has a long runtime, it's probably going to scare people away. Please check this story out if you want to. As I said, this is a should you read and not a why you should read, for that reason that who knows if this is ever going to end. Maybe this video will like eventually, age poorly, and there will be a part 2. I really hope there's a part 2, because like I need an ending to this, because it was a solid read. So yeah, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. My name is Oscar. Please take care of thyself. Please taketh care of thyself. Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? That is the real question.